Chapter 6, Part 2 of Miss Mapp. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Miss Mapp by E. F. Benson. Chapter 6, Part 2. Miss Mapp had been tempted, when she went home that morning, after enjoying the autumn tints, to ask Diva to lunch with her, but remembered in time that she had told her cook to broach one of the tins of corned beef, which no human wizard could coax into the store cupboard again, if he shut the door after it. Diva would have been sure to say something acid and allusive, to remark on its excellence being happily not wasted on the poor people in the hospital, or if she had not said anything at all about it, her silence as she ate a great deal would have had a sharp flavour. But Miss Mapp would have liked, especially when she went to take her rest afterwards on the big sofa in the garden-room, to have had somebody to talk to, for her brain seethed with conjectures as to what had happened, was happening, and would happen, and discussion was the best method of simplifying a problem, of narrowing it down to the limits of probability, whereas when she was alone now with her own imaginings, the most fantastic of them seemed plausible. She had, however, handed a glorious suggestion to the Padre, the one, that is, which concerned the cause of the duel, and it had been highly satisfactory to observe the sympathy and respect with which he had imbibed it. She had, too, been so discreet about it. She had not come within measurable distance of asserting that the challenge had been in any way connected with her. She had only been very emphatic on the point of its not being connected with poor dear Irene, then occupied herself with her sweet flowers. That had been sufficient, and she felt in her bones and marrow that he inferred what she had meant him to infer. The vulture of surmise ceased to peck at her for a few moments as she considered this, and followed up a thread of gold. Though the Padre would surely be discreet, she hoped that he would let slip to dear Evie in the course of the vivid conversation they would be sure to have over lunch, that he had a good guess as to the cause which had led to that savage challenge. Upon which dear Evie would be certain to ply him with direct squeaks and questions, and when she got hot, as in animal, vegetable, and mineral, his reticence would lead her to make a good guess too. She might be incredulous, but there the idea would be in her mind, while if she felt that these stirring days were no time for scepticism, she could hardly fail to be interested and touched. Before long, how soon Miss Mapp was happily not aware, she would pop in to see Diva, or Diva would pop in to see her, and Evie, observing a discretion similar to that of the Padre and herself, would soon enable dear Diva to make a good guess too. After that, all would be well, for dear Diva, such a gossiping darling, would undoubtedly tell everybody in Tilling, under vows of secrecy, so that she should have the pleasure of telling everybody herself just what her good guess was. Thus, very presently, all Tilling would know exactly that which Miss Mapp had not said to the dear Padre, namely, that the duel which had been fought, or which hadn't been fought, was all about her. And the best of it was, that though everybody knew, it would still be a great and beautiful secret, reposing inviolably in every breast or chest, as the case may be. She had no anxiety about anybody asking direct questions of the duellists, for if duelling, for years past, had been a subject which no delicately minded person alluded to purposefully in Major Benjy's presence, how much more now, after this critical morning, would that subject be taboo? That certainly was a good thing, for the duellists, if closely questioned, might have had a different explanation, and it would be highly inconvenient to have two contradictory stories going about. But as it was, nothing could be nicer. The whole of the rest of Tilling, under promise of secrecy, would know, and even if under further promises of secrecy they communicated their secret to each other, there would be no harm done. After this excursion into Elysian fields, poor Miss Mapp had to get back to her vulture again, and the hour's rest that she had felt was due to herself as the heroine of a duel became a period of extraordinary cerebral activity. Puzzle as she might, she could make nothing whatever of the portmanteau and the excursion to the early train, and she got up long before her hour was over, since she found that the more she thought, the more invincible were the objections to any conclusion that she drowningly grasped at. Whatever attack she made on this mystery, the garrison failed to march out and surrender, but kept their flag flying, and her conjectures were woefully blasted by the forces of the most elementary reasons. But as the agony of suspense, if no fresh topic of interest intervened, would be frankly unendurable, she determined to concentrate no more on it, but rather to commit it to the ice-house or safe of her subconscious mind, from which at will, when she felt refreshed and reinvigorated, she could unlock it and examine it again. The whole problem was more superlatively baffling than any that she could remember having encountered in all these inquisitive years, just as the subject of it was more majestic than any, for it concerned not hoarding, nor visits of the Prince of Wales, nor poppy-trimmed gowns, but life and death and firing of deadly pistols. And should love be added to this august list? Certainly not by her, though Tilling might do what it liked. In fact, Tilling always did. She walked across to the bow window from which she had conducted so many exciting and successful investigations. But to-day the view seemed as stale and unprofitable as the world appeared to Hamlet, even though Mrs. Poppit at that moment went waddling down the street and disappeared round the corner where the dentist and Mr. Wyse lived. With a sense of fatigue, Miss Mapp recalled the fact that she had seen the housemaid cleaning Mr. Wyse's windows yesterday. Children dear, was it yesterday? And had noted her industry, and drawn from it the irresistible conclusion that Mr. Wyse was probably expected home. He usually came back about mid-October, and let slip allusions to his enjoyable visits in Scotland, and his villeggiatura, so he was pleased to express it, with his sister the Contessa de Fariglione at Capri. That Contessa Fariglione was rather a mythical personage to Miss Mapp's mind. She was certainly not in a medieval copy of Who's Who, which was the only accessible handbook in matters relating to noble and notable personages, and though Miss Mapp would not have taken an oath that she did not exist, she saw no strong reason for supposing that she did. Certainly she had never been to Tilling, which was strange as her brother lived there, and there was nothing but her brother's allusions to certify her. About Mrs. Poppit now, had she gone to see Mr. Wyse, or had she gone to the dentist? One or other it must be, for apart from them that particular street contained nobody who counted, and at the bottom it simply conducted you out into the uneventful country. Mrs. Poppit was all dressed up, and she would never walk in the country in such a costume. It would do either for Mr. Wyse or the dentist, for she was the sort of woman who would like to appear grand in the dentist's chair, so that he might be shy of hurting such a fine lady. Then again Mrs. Poppit had wonderful teeth, almost too good to be true, and before now she had asked who lived at the pretty little house just round the corner, as if to show that she didn't know where the dentist lived. Or had she found out by some underhand means that Mr. Wyse had come back, and had gone to call on him and give him the first news of the duel, and talk to him about Scotland? Very likely they had neither of them been to Scotland at all. They conspired to say that they had been to Scotland, and stayed at shooting lodges, keepers' lodges more likely, in order to impress Tilling with their magnificence. Miss Mapp sat down on the central heating pipes in her window, and fell into one of her reconstructive musings. Partly, if Mr. Wyse was back, it was well just to run over his record; partly she wanted to divert her mind from the two houses just below, that of Major Benjy on the one side, and that of Captain Puffin on the other, which contained the key to the great insoluble mystery, from conjecture as to which she wanted to obtain relief. Mr. Wyse, anyhow, would serve as a mild opiate, for she had never lost an angry interest in him. Though he was for 8 months of the year, or thereabouts, in Tilling, he was never, for a single hour, of Tilling. He did not exactly invest himself with an air of condescension and superiority, Miss Mapp did him that justice, but he made other people invest him with it, so that it came to the same thing, he was invested. He did not drag the fact of his sister being the Contessa Fariglione into conversation, but if talk turned on sisters, and he was asked about his, he confessed to her nobility. The same phenomenon appeared when the innocent county of Hampshire was mentioned, for it turned out that he knew the county well, being one of the Wyses of Whitchurch. You couldn't say he talked about it, but he made other people talk about it. He was quite impervious to satire on such points, for when, goaded to madness, Miss Mapp had once said that she was one of the Mapps of Maidstone, he had merely bowed and said, "A very old family, I believe," and when the conversation branched off on to old families he had rather pointedly said "we" to Miss Mapp. So poor Miss Mapp was sorry she had been satirical. But for some reason Tilling never ceased to play up to Mr. Wyse, and there was not a tea-party or bridge-party given during the whole period of his residence there to which he was not invited. Hostesses always started with him, sending him round a note with "To await answer," written in the top left-hand corner, since he had clearly stated that he considered the telephone an undignified instrument only fit to be used for household purposes, and had installed his in the kitchen, in the manner of the Wyses of Whitchurch. That alone, apart from Mr. Wyse's old-fashioned notions on the subject, made telephoning impossible, for your summons was usually answered by his cook, who instantly began scolding the butcher irrespective and disrespective of whom you were. When her mistake was made known to her, she never apologized, but grudgingly said she would call Mr. Figgis, who was Mr. Wyse's valet. Mr. Figgis always took a long time in coming, and when he came he sneezed or did something disagreeable, and said, "Yes, yes, what is it?" in a very testy manner. After explanations he would consent to tell his master, which took another long time, and even then Mr. Wyse did not come himself, and usually refused the proffered invitation. Miss Mapp had tried the expedient of sending Withers to the telephone when she wanted to get at Mr. Wyse's, but this had not succeeded, for Withers and Mr. Wyse's cook quarrelled so violently before they got to business, that Mr. Figgis had to calm the cook and Withers to complain to Miss Mapp. This, in brief, was the general reason why Tilling sent notes to Mr. Wyse. As for chatting through the telephone, which was the main use of telephones, the thing was quite out of the question. Miss Mapp revived a little as she made this piercing analysis of Mr. Wyse, and the warmth of the central heating pipes, on this baffling day of autumn temps, was comforting. No one could say that Mr. Wyse was not punctilious in matters of social etiquette, for though he refused 3/4 of the invitations which were showered on him, he invariably returned the compliment by an autographed note, hoping that he might have the pleasure of entertaining you at lunch on Thursday next, for he always gave a small luncheon party on Thursday. These invitations were couched in Chesterfield terms. Mr. Wyse said that he had met a mutual friend just now who had informed him that you were in residence, and had encouraged him to hope that you might give him the pleasure of your company, etc. This was alluring diction. It presented the image of Mr. Wyse stepping briskly home again, quite heartened up by this chance encounter, and no longer the prey to melancholy at the thought that you might not give him the joy. He was encouraged to hope. These polite expressions were traced in a neat upright hand on paper which, when he had just come back from Italy, often bore a coronet on the top with Villa Faraglione Capri, printed on the right-hand top corner, and Amelia, the name of his putative sister, in sprawling gilt on the left, the whole being lightly erased. Of course he was quite right to filch a few sheets, but it threw rather a lurid light on his character that they should be such grand ones. Last year only, in a fit of passion at Mr. Wyse having refused 6 invitations running on the plea of other engagements, Miss Mapp had headed a movement, the object of which was that Tilling should not accept any of Mr. Wyse's invitations unless he accepted its. This had met with a theoretical sympathy. The Bartletts, Diva, Irene, the Poppits had all agreed, rather absently, that it would be a very proper thing to do, but the very next Thursday they had all, including the originator, met on Mr. Wyse's doorstep for a luncheon party, and the movement, then and there, collapsed. Though they all protested and rebelled against such a notion, the horrid fact remained that everybody basked in Mr. Wyse's effulgence whenever it was disposed to shed itself on them. Much as they distrusted the information they dragged out of him, they adored hearing about the Villa Faraglione, and dressed themselves in their very best clothes to do so. Then again there was the quality of the lunch itself. Often there was caviare, and it was impossible, though the interrogator who asked whether it came from Twemlow's feared the worst, not to be mildly excited to know, when Mr. Wyse referred the question to Figgis, that the caviare had arrived from Odessa that morning. The hunch of roe deer came from Perthshire. The wine, on the subject of which the Major could not be silent, and which often made him extremely talkative, was from my brother-in-law's vineyard. And Mr. Wyse would taste it with the air of a connoisseur and say, "Not quite as good as last year. I must tell my sister." Again, when Mr. Wyse did condescend to honour a tea-party or a bridge-party, Tilling writhed under the consciousness that their general deportment was quite different from that which they ordinarily practised among themselves. There was never any squabbling at Mr. Wyse's table, and such squabbling as took place at the other table was conducted in low hissings and whispers, so that Mr. Wyse should not hear. Diva never haggled over her gains or losses when he was there. The Padre never talked Scotch or Elizabethan English. Evie never squeaked like a mouse. no shrill recriminations or stately sarcasms took place between partners, and if there happened to be a little disagreement about the rules, Mr. Wyse's decision, though he was not a better player than any of them, was accepted without a murmur. At intervals for refreshment, in the same way, Diva no longer filled her mouth and both hands with nougat chocolate; there was no scrambling or jostling, but the ladies were waited on by the gentlemen, who then refreshed themselves. And yet Mr. Wyse in no way asserted himself, or reduced them all to politeness by talking about the polished manner of Italians. It was Tilling itself which chose to behave in this unusual manner in his presence. Sometimes Diva might forget herself for a moment, and address something withering to her partner, but the partner never replied in suitable terms, and Diva became honey-mouthed again. It was, indeed, if Mr. Wyse had appeared at 2 or 3 parties, rather a relief not to find him at the next, and breathe freely in less rarefied air. But whether or not he came he always returned the invitation by one to a Thursday luncheon party, and thus the high circles of Tilling met every week at his house. Miss Mapp came to the end of this brief retrospect, and determined, when once it was proved that Mr. Wyse had arrived, to ask him to tea on Tuesday. That would mean lunch with him on Thursday, and it was unnecessary to ask anybody else, unless Mr. Wyse accepted. If he refused there would be no tea party. But after the events of the last 24 hours, there was no vividness in these plans and reminiscences, and her eye turned to the profile of the Colonel's house. "The portmanteau," she said to herself. No, she must take her mind off that subject. She would go for a walk, not into the High Street, but into the quiet level country, away from the turmoil of passion in the Padre's sense, and quarrels in her own, where she could cool her curiosity and her soul with contemplation of the swallows and the white butterflies, if they had not all been killed by the touch of frost last night, and the autumn tints of which there were none whatever in the treeless marsh. Decidedly the shortest way out of the town was that which led past Mr. Wyse's house. But before leaving the garden-room she practised several faces at the looking-glass opposite the door, which should suitably express, if she met anybody to whom the cause of the challenge was likely to have spread, the bewildering emotion which the unwilling cause of it must feel. There must be a wistful wonder, there must be a certain pride, there must be the remains of romantic excitement, and there must be deep womanly anxiety. The carriage of the head did the pride, the wide open eyes did the wistful wonder, and the romance, the deep womanly anxiety lurked in the tremulous smile, and a violent rubbing of the cheeks produced the colour of excitement. In answer to any impertinent questions, if she encountered such, she meant to give an absent answer, as if she had not understood. Thus equipped she set forth. It was rather disappointing to meet nobody, but as she passed Mr. Wyse's bow windows she adjusted the chrysanthemums she wore, and she had a good sight of his profile in the back of Mrs. Poppit's head. They appeared deep in conversation, and Miss Mapp felt that the tiresome woman was probably giving him a very incomplete account of what had happened. She returned late for tea, and broke off her apologies to Withers for being such a trouble, because she saw a note on the hall table. There was a coronet on the back of the envelope, and it was addressed in the neat, punctilious hand which so well expressed its writer. Villa Fariglione, Capri, a coronet, and Amelia, all lightly crossed out, headed the page, and she read, "Dear Miss Mapp, it is such a pleasure to find myself in our little Tilling again, and our mutual friend, Mrs. Poppit, M.B.E., tells me you are in residence, and encourages me to hope that I may induce you to take déjeuner with me on Thursday at 1 o'clock. May I assure you, with all delicacy, that you will not meet here any one whose presence could cause you the slightest embarrassment? Pray excuse this hasty note. Figgis will wait for your answer if you are in. Yours very sincerely, Algernon Wyse." Had not Withers been present, who might have misconstrued her action, Miss Mapp would have kissed the note. Failing that, she forgave Mrs. Poppit for being an M.B.E. "The dear woman," she said, "she has heard, and she has told him." Of course she need not ask Mr. Wyse to tea now. Chapter 7